Okay, so let's start. So I will introduce myself a bit more. I'm a senior education migration consultant. I'm specializing in nursing-related migration, okay, because even extending to allied health professionals, this is my field of passion, okay, because I think that's my way to support, the international community in Victoria and also Australia. Okay, and I think health professionals, even though, especially during pandemic periods, so important to our community. So I feel very proud, that I can serve you guys. Okay, so let's commence. That's the first topic I want to touch is the budget. I don't know whether you have followed the newly released budget or not last week, but if you have read news, you can see that the actual allocation has not changed. It remains as what it is for this financial year, which is 160,000. Okay, and not only the allocation, for the whole allocation and for each of the visa streams, even though it's for skilled or family or for independent and state nomination or so on and so forth, right? It also remains the same. The proportion is still the same. So for the upcoming financial year, which is 2021 and 22 financial year, you'll be looking at the same allocation as what it is now. So I will not go into details about all the allocation for each stream. You can have a look, okay? And what we concern the most is the state nomination stream, right? Which is this one, state and territory nominated, as well as regional. So state and territory nominated, this one is 190 and regional is 491, combining 494, but very few will apply for 494, right? And so the allocation, basically what we're looking at will be remain the same as well, okay? So this is according to Skill Select on their official website. This is a current state and territory nominated visa allocations, all right? So that's the basic information about the budget. Okay, if you have any problem, please ask me. I'm happy to answer it after the session, okay? And for 189, I think now you have realized that, 189 cannot be relied on like solely by itself because it's so unpredictable, right? Previously, it was like, the invitation was on a monthly basis, previously fortnightly basis, but now is will only invite every 3 months, every season. So you can see in total, the amount is very small, not only because of that, but also if you want to apply for 189, you have to be selected. Your occupation has to be selected for each invitation round, in each invitation round. So that means even though you can claim like 90 points, which is very high, but if you're not selected, like nursing related occupations and registered nurses especially, were not selected for the January and April rounds. So it's very obvious that you cannot rely on 189 solely for, for your PR, right? So you have to always consider, now it's not even a plan B, you have always consider, you have to take as your first option, right? 190 and 491. So there are actually 8 territories and states in Australia, right? And today, because the time is very limited, I'll only go through Victoria's and South Australia's, okay? Which the majority of, I think a few from Queensland 10, right? A few from Queensland, but I cannot touch on Queensland because the time is limited. So let's talk about Victoria's state nomination, all right? Victoria's state nomination has changed several times. From last year, in the beginning of last year, it was very welcoming, okay? And if you have an Australian qualification You don't have to be a Victorian student, and you don't have to be residing in Victoria. As long as you have an Australian qualification, nursing qualification, you have got your nursing registration and passed your skill assessment and come to Victoria, you will be granted your state nomination application. Okay, so that is very, very welcoming back then. And then people all got this news and all come to Victoria. So it was overwhelming. So, and then I think on 28th of May, right, the program was ceased because the places were all filled, and a vast majority of the applicants were being suspended. Their application were being suspended. So that was carried on until the interim period, and then was the COVID was hit, right? And then during the pandemic period, it was called interim period because back then budget were not released, right? And the policy obviously were not in place. The allocation was still, up in the air. So, but after the interim period, when it comes to the new year, the second half of the financial year, right, the new policy has been released. And then the ROI system has been introduced and in place. You all know ROI, right? You know ROI stands for registration of interest, and EOI is a prerequisite. Okay, so which means you have to be invited for your ROI to be eligible to apply for your state nomination application. So ROI now is very important, and it has selection criteria as well. ROI basically is like a poll. So they put you into a poll, right? And they will select you. They will select, the best ones from this pool, right? So before introducing ROI status, I will go through the what we call the requirements, the state nomination requirements, right? The Victorian state nomination requirements, it has occupation requirement, which only the following nursing-related occupations will be invited for their ROI applications, including aged care, critical care and emergency, mental health, and perioperative. Okay, only these 4 specializations will be invited. And also employment. That is why we'll leave this part with Jesse, but I want to lay emphasis on this because employment is so important. It's now like the prerequisite, right, for getting your ROI application successful. So according to the information on our official website, it says you have to have, you have to be working continuously for the last 6 months prior to the ROI application. That's one. And then your employment has to be closely related to the nominated occupation. Basically, all the nursing occupations will be eligible because it only requires the first 4 ANSCO code to be identical, which is 2544, right? For all the nursing occupations, the first 4 ANSCO code, the first 4 digits are the same. And also the most important thing is that you have to work for at least 20 hours per week. Okay, it no need to be permanent or full-time. It can be casual, but it has to be at least 20 hours per week, right? But we have already consulted the state government, and so the actual thing is that during the lockdown period, as you cannot be transferred, you cannot go to a different facility, especially for aged care facility, right? You'll only be working for one facility. So probably if you're working for an agency employer, you won't be able to reach 20 hours per week requirement. So that will be given special consideration as well, but only for the lockdown period. As well as if you were on sick leave, it will also be accepted. but you have to give evidence. Okay, the medical statement has to be given to the state government for this. Okay, so that's the employment requirement. So these two basic requirements, occupation as well as employment. For the residing residency requirement, we don't even have to mention that. You know, during the employment, you will definitely be required to stay in Victoria, right? You cannot be residing in New South Wales while working in Victoria. Okay, so that's a requirement. Okay, and you can see as the work requirement is prior to the ROI application, right? So before applying for your ROI application, right, you have to meet the requirement. So by the time lodging your ROI application, I'll emphasize again, you have to meet the requirement. You cannot say that let's just lodge my ROI application first and wait until, because it is not the official state nomination application, right? It doesn't work like that. Okay, you have to meet all the requirements before lodging your ROI application. Okay, so now you know the submission window, right? For the new policy, starting from January, every first week of that month is the submission window. During that period, you will be able to lodge your ROI applications. And then after that week, it will be closed. Okay, and approaching to the third week, on the Friday of the third week, right, you will be invited. That is the invitation date. So May would be which is this Friday, will be the last invitation round, as it is the last invitation date. We cannot be sure whether they will still be inviting, you know, after this Friday, but according to the information on their official website, right, this Friday will be the last day for invitation for this financial year. Okay, and let's see the status. Okay, the current status you can see, right, the 2,500 is the annual allocation for 190, and 1,043 is for 491, right? You can say this one is the allocation, and they have only failed. So they have only successfully nominated 1,000, you know, people, applicants. So still have, you know, more than half to be filled. So the allocation is still not, you know, exhausted. There's still plenty of places, especially for nursing applicants. I will explain the reason why, right, later on. So now the figure is like the selected ROI, because ROI does not mean that you are successfully being nominated, right? You are just, you know, got invited to apply for that state nomination application, but 90% that you will be invited if the information you provided in ROI application is genuine. Okay, so the figure here, the pending ones, the figure for the pending ones is 4,890. Okay, and then for the ROI invitation update, we have followed each of the invitation round and got all this information ready. I will not go through them one by one. If you are interested, I will send all this, you know, data to you, right? I would like Tim to send all this data to you, but now I don't think we have enough time to go through one by one. Okay, so the takeaway message is now the, you know, places are still quite sufficient, right? There's still opportunities, but I will explain why. If you are following closely about the invitation status, you will see that a lot of RN applicants were not, you know, they were not invited, not only because they're not good enough, but because, you know, because of the ROI issue. Because if you have submitted an ROI during the interim period, right, and then you whether updated it or you whether, when the new policy were introduced, you submitted a new ROI application, right? Then you're pretty much, the process will be delayed for you, okay? And that is the reason why. But we'll wait and see how the invitation will be going for this Friday. I'm pretty sure that if this Friday is the last invitation date and they want to fill all these, vacant places, they have to give, registrars at least like 80% of that, places. And this picture was cited from the official seminar organized by MIA. And this is an official picture from Victorian state government from the program. As you can see, the smaller the font is, which means, less the cohort is, right? And the larger the font is, means, more applicants for that occupation. And registered nurses will be, the largest cohort, especially critical care and emergency, as well as aged care, because perioperative and mental health, these jobs are too hard to get, okay? So this is just a brief, introduction about the current status of the program. So if you have any problems or inquiries and questions, please feel free to ask me after the session. I'm happy to answer it. Okay, so this is for Victoria. And South Australia, I will just, basically give some basic information. So for South Australia, it's very simple. If you want to find the actual policy and requirements for your specific occupation, you can just go to the official website and then click occupation lists. Okay, then select your own list, search your own occupation. It will give you all this detailed information about what's the requirements for 190 and what's the requirement for 491. Basically, the only difference is the length of employment, okay? And also, if you're a South Australia graduate, okay, there's one thing I have to lay emphasis on, because if you still want to be considered as South Australia graduate, you have to continuously residing in South Australia after graduation. Okay, you cannot go to another state and live and work there. If that's the case, you won't be considered as South Australia graduate. And if you are a high-performing graduate, which means your GPA has to be at least 6 out of a 7-scale GPA calculation. It's roughly 80 to 85 on average, right? So you will be waived, your employment requirement. So you don't need to have any employment, then you can apply. But it has to be under this Talent and Innovators program, and it will be a different pathway to apply from, okay, to apply for. Okay, so that's South Australia state nomination, just to let you know. So now we can see for Victorian state government, not only Victorian state government, as the 189 is no longer the first choice, right? And a vast majority of RN students and applicants are flowing to, all these state nomination pathways and programs. So we'll all be in a more competitive situation. So if you ask me how to prepare, I suggest you to consider, because for Victoria, the selection criteria now is not very clear, but for the rest of the state, the selection criteria are quite similar, which is occupation. Your occupation has to be on the list, right? And your point score, whether it's high or low, like in Queensland, if you want to apply for 190, right, you'll have to be at least 80 points to be considered. And whether do you have an Australian qualification for all the nursing graduates, I believe you all do. And your level of qualification, whether it's master or bachelor, and I don't think it will apply to nursing graduates, okay? And your English language ability, it will also reflect on your point score and your age, and also your ROI submission status. But this is only for Victoria, okay? So this is a brief introduction about all the state nomination policies. I've only touched on the, I've only introduced to you about the Victoria state nomination as well as South Australia. Okay, and if you're interested in the other states' policy, please feel free to ask me. Okay, so now I think many of you are from Victoria, so we have already mentioned that only these 4 occupations will be considered, and this policy will most likely be carried on, you know, into the coming financial year. Right? So we'll still be facing this problem, which is to be assessed as one of the 4 occupations here. NEC is not good enough, okay? So how to do this and what, you know, actually the requirements are. If you have already got your NEC, which I recommend you to do so, even though you don't have your, have not got your job yet, right? I still recommend you to apply for your NEC right after graduation once you have obtained your upper registration. Okay, because I still recommend you to apply for 189, even though the hope is very small, right? But you still want to seize that opportunity, because now 189, even though they only invite on a seasonal basis, there's still chances. Like in, I think December last year, if not November, nursing graduates, nursing applicants were invited for 189. So it would be wise for you to do so right after obtaining your upper registration to get your NEC. So after obtaining your NEC skill assessment outcome, which does not require any employment, right? And upon that, you want to further accumulate your work experience to meet the requirement for apply for all these occupations, right? Then you will be fall under this category, which is called LOD, Letter of Determination Reissue process, and it works like that, okay? So employment validity for your, because not only the current employment experience will be considered, all the experience accumulated within last 5 years will be considered, okay? Even though this employment, you know, was obtained in Vietnam, it will also be counted as valid, okay? So it doesn't, it also not necessarily to be like 3 months in the last 5 years, as long as you have been working in that specific field, like for example, you know, perioperative or emergency field, right? Within the last 5 years, then you will be considered, okay? And the length of the employment has to be 3 months, okay? No matter how old or current your employment is, it has to be no less than 3 months. And the accumulated work hours has to be at least 260 hours, okay? And your employment status, as I've mentioned before, is quite similar, you know, to the employment requirement of Victorian state government, which is a state nomination, which is it can either be full-time, part-time, or casual, doesn't matter. You can be working for multiple employers, right? And your employer can be agency as well, which means you can be dispatched to different facilities and hospitals. Okay, as long as you can accumulate 260 hours of employment. So you may ask, is there any requirement like, you have to work no less than 20 hours per week? There is no such requirement, okay? That requirement is only for your state nomination application, okay? Not for your skill assessment application. So that's basically what it is, the basic requirement, right? And once you get onto the official page, official website, and actually apply for your LOD reissue, you will get to this page, okay? And the cost for LOD reissue is $125. The original one is $340, right? And you only need to submit reference letter if it is a reissue application. You don't have to submit all the documents again, including the certificate of good standing, which is very hard to obtain and arrange. Only reference letter will be sufficient. The processing time will also be shorter, which is 2 to 3 weeks, right? And also your existing outcome will be covered, okay? And the validity period will be counting from the date when the first NEC outcome was generated. Okay, and now the most important thing is the employment reference letter. You have to prepare it by yourself, or let your agent, like us, to prepare it for you, because very rarely that your employer will do this for you. They'll only sign the letter for you, but you have to prepare it by yourself, okay? So you must know what information that must be contained in this reference letter for it to be considered as valid from the perspective of NMAC. So firstly, obviously, your personal details has to be right. Your residential address, passport number, and your date of birth. It has to be in your official letterhead, which includes your facility, your employer's address, email, contact number, and Australian business number. The most important one is your job duties, okay? And also it has to be highly related to the nominated occupation. And this is the key information they will refer to when assessing, your relevancy, your employment's relevancy towards the certain occupation. Okay, so this is very important. And for example, I will sidetrack a little bit. For example, for critical care and emergency, I want to let you know that even though you work in like surgical or medical ward, you still have a chance to be assessed as critical care and emergency, not necessarily be working, at ED or, ICU. As long as you can demonstrate that your ward is, acute, and your tasks is of high acuity, I can say that, right? Then you have a chance to be assessed as acute, as critical care and emergency, right? And also you have to include an example. This is not compulsory, but from time to time will be required to provide this information. So this letter will be written, in the name of a senior RN, or like your supervisor, your nurse in charge, okay, so on and so forth. So they have to give this example reflecting your job duties performed in that example, right? Basically explaining how you were carrying out your nursing work, and they have witnessed and satisfied that you are professionally competent, okay? So this is a part. This is this part. And also for agency employer, if your employer is agency like Scrub or probably VNS, so when it comes to your document preparation, you have to prepare a reference letter, right? But that reference letter can be prepared by one facility. You don't have to prepare, a reference letter for each of the facility you were dispatched to. That is too complicated. Only one reference letter will be enough. But you will be required, your employer, that agency will be required to provide a, what do we say, a statement of service, containing all the information about your employment commencement date, right, and your job position, as well as your, accumulated work hours. So that is for agency employer only. If you're directly employed by a hospital or aged care facility, the reference letter by itself would be enough. Okay. So that's our successful cases for aged care and for critical care and emergency, right? Okay, so that's pretty much my part, but I know how long is now. Yeah, still okay. Okay, I'll add on one more thing. For 45, you will still have, even after you're 45, you still have options to extend your visas, right? 45 is one option, 407 is another. Okay, you can consult me if you have this problem. And if you want to study nursing without any relevant background, you can still do so. The quickest way for bachelor's degree would be graduate entry. And that course is offered by QUT in Queensland and Flinders University in South Australia. And if you want to study master without any relevant nursing background, you can still do so, but you will be required to take a prerequisite course, which is called human biology. Okay, so that's my part for now. Sorry for being for overtime. It's now 10 minutes over. I should be okay. Now I will pass on to Jesse. Thank you all.